So by now you've been able to create some folders and some files on your own local computer system, whether it's the Mac OS or a Windows computer. You've been able to view the page source of a HTML web page. You've seen some HTML, and you've gotten some comfort in using either Notepad or TextEdit. These are all really, really basic things. You know that .txt means it's a text file, and .html means it's a web page file. So those are the basics of folders and file name extensions. You know how to right-click on things. You know how to create a file and edit it with either Notepad or TextEdit. You're comfortable with Control-C for copy and Control-V for paste, or if you're a Mac user, Command-C and Command-V. That's one of the most basic things you can ask of a person who's learning technology, being able to navigate a file system, make some files, make some folders, being able to copy and paste things. And I hope that in all of this, you've come away with the idea that it doesn't really pay to overcommit to one platform over another, whether it's Mac versus PC or any other comparison you might choose. These basics that I have illustrated here are things that you're going to want to be able to do regardless of your platform of choice. So we've seen some HTML. We've seen that I can create this hello world page and that some pieces of text look different. So what are these things? HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Well, in an HTML file, you will find 3 programming languages working together. Usually, you'll find HTML and CSS and JavaScript. They complement each other. Each of these languages, though, they serve a distinct purpose. They're not just created at random. They're not created haphazardly. Each language has a specific purpose, and their syntax is different. The language you're going to learn first is HTML. That's why it's in bold here. Then we'll spend a little time learning some CSS. And in this video course, you will learn no JavaScript. In this particular HTML and CSS for Future Programmers video series, we're not covering JavaScript there. JavaScript is a programming language, a general purpose programming language that can carry out logical instructions, and that's different from the very domain-specific special purpose languages of HTML and CSS. HTML exists to give a web page structure, and CSS exists to control the presentation of a page and its content, things like color, font size, spacing, etc. But you can't really afford to learn one without the other. And that's because these languages are all about specialization. These different languages have different purposes and exist to do different things, but they're meant to work together. No one would confuse the muscular system with the skeletal system with the digestive system in the human body. They're separate systems, but they're all connected, and they all do different and important things. By way of analogy, HTML is a bit like the skeleton of a web page. It provides a web page with structure. So I want to start with some disclaimers here. Who decides what valid HTML is? There's 2 organizations that you should know about. There's the World Wide Web Consortium, and there's also a very well-established source for developers. It's called the MDN Web Docs. MDN used to be short for Mozilla Developer Network. That's used to be what the documents were called. Both of these are nonprofit organizations, and they've been around for a long, long time now, from the earliest days of the internet, and you should check them out. What I'm presenting to you here in HTML and CSS for Future Programmers is a small subset of the knowledge that there is available to you about HTML and CSS. And these are the folks, though, who basically make up the rules. So we're going to look at our first HTML tags. I have here a web page, and I'm going to open this up in a browser. Here it is. And I'm going to view my page source, and there's my HTML tags behind all this. Now, if you are I'm using Chrome here, your instructions for doing that might be a little bit different, particularly if you're in Safari. If you're trying to view the page source in Safari, you're probably going to get frustrated, and you're going to have to go install Chrome or Firefox so that you can see this. All right. Okay, let's dissect what we have here. This is just like dissecting a frog in anatomy class. We have this structure, and we're going to take it apart piece by piece so we know what each piece does. Here we have the full HTML document that I just had on the screen, and we're going to look at the first tag here. The doc type declaration. So the doc type declaration lets the browser know what kind of code it can expect in the rest of the file. If you don't specify the doc type, the browser will have to guess. The whole web page doesn't crash or become unresponsive or unavailable if you leave this out. But you also don't want the browser to have to guess this sort of thing. So it's a best practice to specify this. The next tag is the HTML tag. Notice that the HTML tag starts at the top and ends at the bottom with a bunch of content in the middle. The HTML tag indicates where the whole HTML document will stop and start. Notice that the HTML tag has this extra little bit in it where I specify lang equals en. That's called an attribute. So HTML is the tag, then there's a space, and then there's a attribute. And as we go on learning about HTML and CSS, we're going to learn about other attributes, but this just happens to be the first one. The lang attribute lets the browser know what language the document is written in. And you can imagine that that might be important, especially if you're presenting content in some language that uses, say, special characters. All right, that's my HTML tag. The HTML tag defines the whole HTML document. Next up, after the HTML tag, is the head tag. The head tag holds information about the page. It holds the title tag as well as other tags. Those other tags might be used to describe the content of the page or link the page to other resources. So when you see the word head, you should think overhead. Most of what you see here inside of the head tag will be invisible to the user. It's just sort of overhead or extra information about the page. The exception to that would be the title tag, which we will see in just a moment. Here we have the title tag. The title tag indicates the generic title of a page. And you would notice that in your browser tab. So if I were to pull up this web page in our browser, I would see Hello World in this tab at the top of the page. So the text here, Hello World, is not down in the main body of the document. It's just the tab. If you were using some screen reader software, the title would be the very first thing that the screen reader would announce. So for that reason alone, the title tag is important. Don't leave it out. You should also notice that the text here, Hello World, is inside the title tags. This is the opening tag. This is the closing tag. Notice the pattern. The opening tags have a pair of angle brackets with the tag name. The closing tag has a pair of angle brackets with a slash and the tag name. That same pattern repeats over and over and over again in all the tags. All the tags, that is, that have an opening and closing. There are also what's known as self-closing tags. That is to say, some tags stand on their own. They don't have an opener or closer. But so far, with the exception of the doc type declaration, so far everything here has had an opening tag and a closing tag. So notice how the text hello world is inside the opening tag and the closing tag. It's between the tags. We would say that the title tag contains the text hello world. Hello world is contained inside the title tag. The body tag holds the visible portion of the page. It contains all the other tags that make up the document. You see how it contains is like the word idea of wrapping around. The body tag holds or contains or wraps around a whole bunch of other content. So the body tag is like the bread of a sandwich, right? So I have the top slice, the bottom slice, and then I have all the sandwich stuff in between, right? The meat and the cheese and the lettuce and the tomatoes, right? So the body tag is a lot like the bread of a sandwich. It's a tag that holds or contains other tags. Inside the body, we have the H1 tag. The H1 tag holds text for a top level heading, and you can think of headings like you would think about the outline of an essay. So let's say in my imaginary essay, I have introduction, body, and conclusion. Those are the top level headings. Underneath introduction, I have overview and premise. And then down in the body, I have my first excellent point, my second excellent point, and then I have yet another tier to my outline, a third tier down here, indicated by numeral 1, a corollary to my point. And then I have back up to the top level, conclusion. So thinking strictly in visual terms, the H1 tag will make the text big and bold. But making the text big and bold is not the primary purpose of the H1 tag. The primary purpose of the H1 tag is to convey that the text is a top-level heading. So a screen reader or a web crawler will attach special importance to the content of an H1 tag. So we've seen H1. You should know that there are 6 heading tags, H1 through H6. So I've only used H1, H2, and H3 over here in my example. You can go as far down as H6 in order to convey nested levels of importance. So I have my introduction, that's the top level importance, body, top level, conclusion, top level. Inside the introduction, I have overview and premise. They're secondary levels of importance. And then all the way down here, my corollary, that's down at my third level. And you can see that as I go from H1 to H2 to H3, that the bolded heading text gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Again, the point, though, is not to change the appearance of the text, although that's helpful for a reader, a person, to look at and say, oh, I see. The point is to convey the meaning that these are levels of headings. And finally, for today, for this video, I should say, we have the P tag. The P tag is meant to hold a paragraph. Paragraphs are always followed by a line break. The paragraph tag is a very generic, commonly used tag, but it does imply, using that tag does imply that the content, that would be the words or sentences inside of the paragraph tag, is meant to be read, like a human, like a narrative, like human beings read things, right? There are other even more generic tags that are just used to hold things. That would be the div and the span tag, but we'll learn about those later. Now, in the last slide, I mentioned line breaks. In case that's unfamiliar terminology, say, what do you mean a line break? Here I have some HTML on the left. I have on the right how it is interpreted by a browser, and you can see that I have the sentences, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, and the line break here would be here. It was, line break, the best, line break, of times, line break. It was, line break, the worst, line break, of times. Notice that the line break here in the HTML file is completely irrelevant. The paragraph tag, the opening and then the closing of the paragraph tag is what forces the line break to occur in the text. The line breaks that appear in the HTML file itself are completely irrelevant. All of the structure of the page is specified by the sequence of characters that's in the HTML file. All right, so I want to recap. This has probably been the most important segment that we've covered so far. We've covered our first tags, tags that you should now know. You should know the doc type declaration. You should know the HTML tag, the head tag, the title tag, the body tag, the H1 tag, and the paragraph tag. These all serve very sensible purposes. You have observed that we can have you've observed that you have the doc type declaration at the top, and it's kind of an oddball. It's its own little thing. But after that, all these tags can have other tags nested inside of them, and they always go in this pattern of head and body. Okay, so the title tag gets nested in the head, and inside of the body we have the H1 tag, the paragraph tag, and other tags. So this structure that we've been presenting here in this example is very, very, very common, is a very, very representative of the structure of every other HTML page that you're going to encounter. Doc type declaration at the top, HTML tag that starts here, ends down here. The next portion of the HTML file is the head. The next portion of the HTML file is the body, and the body is what holds the interesting stuff, right? The H1 tag and the content. Now there's a little question here in my recap. Which of the above tags had an attribute? Do you remember what an attribute is? I'll give you a hint. It was the language attribute, and the HTML tag had a language attribute. Let me go back to that. There it is. Notice that that is different from all the other tags, that lang is not a tag, it's an attribute. It's inside of those two angle brackets. And we're going to see more attributes later on. But for right now, you should know that the only attribute you've seen so far is the lang attribute. And I could specify lang equal to en for English. And of course, there's other abbreviations for other languages like French and German and so on. All right, that brings us to checking our work. I'm going to pause the video here, and we're going to come back and wrap up this chapter with how to check your work.